Shabbat Shalom, friends. Next week we'll be back to our usual two Rabbi standard, but for this week I'll play a lot of positions. It'll be fun. So this week I decided on a whim to watch a film I had never seen before, but actually had been planning to watch ever since one of my high school teachers mentioned it. So it's been a while. That movie is the 1984 Oscar winner Amadeus. Now, for those who haven't seen it, Amadeus is a piece of historical fiction based on the legend of a rivalry between two great composers of their time, Antonio Salieri and Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. In the story of the movie, Salieri had long heard of the prodigy Mozart and had been awed by his compositions. But when he finally meets the young, impetuous Mozart, he couldn't understand why God would choose such a foolish person to be the vessel for creating such divine music. Salieri quickly finds that even for all his talent, ability, and stature, Mozart far outstrips him in genius. Because of this deep blow to his confidence, he becomes determined to ruin Mozart in any way that he can, while pretending to be looking out for his best interests. And he is mostly successful in this effort, though he cannot erase the fact that Mozart's genius is superior to his own. So I have to say, I love the film, 5 stars. The acting, the dazzling number of period sets and costumes, the story itself left me in awe of this work of art. But I had one complaint. The entire plot of the movie is told through an elderly Salieri telling his story to a priest after being committed to an insane asylum. At the end of the story, he essentially confesses to ruining Mozart's life and doing it through illegal and terrible methods. And all the priest can do is sit there and stare into space as Salieri is helped to breakfast by his aide, laughing joyfully and proclaiming himself the god of mediocrity. Yes, Salieri does end his life lonely in an asylum, but that did not feel close to punishment enough for all that he did throughout the film to Mozart. I wanted to see the priest do something, curse him, make him understand how terrible his crime was. Barring that, I wanted to see something bad happen to Salieri in that last scene. Maybe for him to choke on his breakfast, or be attacked by a fellow inmate, or have the ceiling of the asylum come crashing down on him. Anything to just get a little revenge on this villain and provide some resolution. Yes, that's me as a movie watcher, not as a human. But unfortunately, none of that happened. The movie just fades to black, with Salieri gleefully celebrating his brazenness. Needless to say, I left the movie feeling angry. But of course, the reality of life is such that not every villain is punished. Not every righteous person gets to live until old age. This movie displayed that truth. But this, my friends, is not, for the most part, how the stories of our Torah work. In the Torah, nearly every villain meets God's justice eventually, and every righteous person is elevated. The Torah must reflect the belief that God ultimately metes out justice appropriately. But encountering this can come with its own frustrations when trying to square the truth of life as lived with the ideal truth offered to us by the Torah. And yet in our Parsha this week, Korah, God metes out measure for measure justice in as dramatic a fashion as anywhere else in the entire Torah. In this Parsha, Korah and his gang of 250 tribal leaders challenge the authority of Moses and Aaron. At the same time, there is a parallel rebellion from two others, members of the tribe of Reuben, the firstborn, who even refuse to come to Moses when he summons them. They simply send a message, but rather than simply saying, "We are not coming," they instead say, "Lo na'aleh," we will not go up. The Midrash notes how ironic it is for the two of them to use that particular phraseology of not going up, as their ultimate punishment will be to literally go down, to be swallowed up by the earth. Now that is some good measure for measure punishment. I want to see that in the next movie. Amadeus could take a note out of that book. But beyond my thirst for justice for movie villains in general, I found the dynamic between Korah and Moses to be quite reminiscent of the grudge that Korah holds the dynamic between Korah and Moses to be quite reminiscent of the grudge held by against Mozart by Salieri. That was not a good sentence. I'll write that better next time. What I'm trying to say is they're both similar. To understand the parallels, we have to remember who this Korah person is and why he might be rebelling in the first place. The first verse of our Parsha spells out his ancestry. Korah ben Yitzhar ben Kehat ben Levi. He is Moses and Aaron's cousin, a fellow Levite, and a member of the Kehati clan. Earlier in Numbers, it was explained that the Levitical family of Kehat was responsible for carrying the most sacred objects of the sanctuary, a distinct honor, but still very much a rung below the priesthood. Korah asks Moses and Aaron, "Why do you raise yourselves above the people Israel?" It seems he feels that Moses put himself in this leadership position and elevated his brother of his own volition rather than by God's instruction. In short, Korah, forced to be a mover of holy items rather than an officiant of holy rituals, is jealous of Aaron and his children, who get to be where the action really happens. He's so close to the top, but will always feel second best to the priests, which he cannot bear. So while he may couch his complaint in the assertion that all the people are holy, he's really thinking about himself and his own advancement. Salieri does the same thing, as he spreads lies that Mozart is inappropriate with his students so that no one will hire him as a tutor. He claims to care about the safety of everyone, when in truth he's only advancing his own agenda. Korah, too, is ultimately undone by his ambition to rise up the ladder. While seeking to rise up in stature, he too is swallowed by the earth. His ambition to advance up the Levitical ladder is undone by his descent into the earth. All things end well, and Moses and Aaron are publicly shown to be God's chosen leaders. And yet, even with the justice found in this story, it's still a tragedy of unnecessary death, of wasted potential, of an important message used for the sake of personal rather than communal benefit. All the people are holy and God is in their midst. If it wasn't for the context, we could imagine painting these words on the wall in the rotunda as an aspirational ideal for a holy community. Instead, this message of potential recognition for the holiness inherent in all humanity becomes just a pawn in a personal scheme and thereby becomes defiled. And yet within this tale of tragedy, there's a note of hope, however faint. The Torah tells us almost as a side note, the children of Korah did not die. This is a bit confusing, as the Torah seems to say that his whole family was swallowed by the earth. The rabbinic tradition explains this contradiction, that saying that they did not die because they repented of their father's ways. And beyond that, we know that the ancestors of Korah are mentioned later in the Tanakh, in the Bible, as authors of psalms and singers in the Holy Temple. Mizmor Shir Livnei Korah begins the psalm we recite at the end of our morning service every Monday. Somehow the ancestors of this villain who challenged Moses and Aaron, and by extension God, find their way back to sacred service. All the people are holy, and God is in their midst. Perhaps this statement of Korah is more aspirational than it is true. People become holy through their choices, through their actions. All people are equally created in the divine image, but we are only holy when we bring holiness into the world in the ways that the Torah teaches us. Perhaps Korah's children are the perfect example of the fact that holiness must be earned. They made a choice not to follow the dangerous path of their father, and instead chose the path of holiness, of being able to contribute to the Holy Temple with their songs that we still recite to this day. And their choice is even more praiseworthy, considering how difficult it must have been to break with their father's behavior. Perhaps this is what Salieri misunderstood in asking God why God had endowed such a vulgar, immature person with the power to create such divine music. Rather than appreciating the gifts God had given Salieri, he became obsessed with comparing his abilities to those of Mozart, instead of learning from him and focusing on his own personal growth as an artist. His whole life became about bringing down someone he saw as greater in talent. And by doing so, he missed the chance for his own work to become sacred. He blamed God for not giving him the same level of talent and made sure that Mozart would pay the price. But such a pursuit of bringing down those you perceive as above you is a life-destroying proposition. It is, in fact, a path that will lead to your own spiritual degradation, whether you succeed in bringing the other person down in this life or not. Korah also learned this lesson. He obsessed over his own perceived lower status relative to Moses and Aaron and hungered for a higher position. Worse, he brought others along on this mission of destruction with false hopes of rising ever higher in the ranks. He claimed all people to be inherently equally holy, regardless of the merit they gain through their actions. And through this rebellion, he implicitly claimed that God had nothing to do with choosing Moses and Aaron for their positions of leadership. And so to prove that God had selected these leaders, Korah was put to death by an event that only God could cause, the earth opening and swallowing him. When we lose sight of all the goodness we have and the talents that we are given, spending our life only satisfied by being on top, we lose hold of our lives. The earth metaphorically swallows up our humanity, even as we technically remain alive. Salieri may not have received his comeuppance quite in the dramatic fashion that I wished, but he certainly lost his soul in the pursuit of Mozart's destruction. May we remember this, that even as we strive for growth in our lives, that we focus on personal spiritual growth more than simply climbing the rungs of the professional ladder. Now, certainly we should have professional goals and strive to do our work in the best way possible. But we also should remember that that is not how we measure the true greatness of our lives. We measure that in our ability to bring holiness into this broken world. We measure that in our ability to do teshuvah, to have self-reflection and transformation when we find our lives on an unstable path. In short, we measure the success of our lives the way that God does. May we all have the wisdom to be satisfied with the goodness in our lives and focus our strivings not on what can bring down others to make us feel higher, but rather on what enables us to be the best possible version of ourselves. May we then realize a world in which all the people are holy and God is in their midst. Shabbat Shalom.